Hello and welcome to episode 111 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is September 24th, 2018. I am Rollo McFlugel, and with me, as always, is Slappy Jones 2, and we are both of McFlugel.com. The show notes page for this episode is McFlugel.com/111, where you'll be able to find links to the stuff we're talking about, as well as a way to check out our sponsor, which is also us, LibertyMugs.com. We sell libertarian-themed mugs. So be sure to check that out. And with that, I don't want to delay this anymore with me talking about stuff. So let me hand it over to Slappy, and he's going to introduce our guest and our topic.
Thanks, Rollo. Welcome, everyone, to the Rollo and Slappy Show. I'm Slappy Jones. We're going to get into it with our guest today, Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center, who I know probably needs no introduction to most of our listeners. But the 10th Amendment Center does a lot of work on nullification, which we want to talk about, and maybe specifically jury nullification, because we all get our jury notices every now and again, and maybe we'll just throw some questions at them. What do you do? What is nullification? Is it legal? Because I did hear from an attorney once that you're not allowed to nullify as a juror, which is obviously wrong. But anyway, welcome to the show, Michael.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
So, quickly, tell us what the 10th Amendment Center does.
Can I just read something verbatim? I don't want to be a narcissist or anything, but...
Be a narcissist.
Okay, this is from the Southern Poverty Law Center's profile page on me.
Oh,
perfect.
And they have had a full page dedicated to me personally for about 6.5 years. I know Dave Smith stumbled across it recently, and he was talking about it on his show maybe a couple of months ago. But this is how it starts out. It says, Michael Boldin is an ideologue who has spent years promoting the idea that states can, quote, nullify federal legislation they don't like. The very same argument pushed by defenders of slavery and segregation, and just as baseless now as it was then.
So wait, you favor...
For that, by the way.
You favor Slappy. We made a mistake.
I mean, if SPLC says it must be true. Or as Lou Rockwell once mentioned to me in email a few years ago after Rachel Maddow spent about a 10-minute full segment talking about how my work, not me personally, but the 10th Amendment Center, the organization I founded back in 2006, was bad for supporting nullification. So therefore, we're like John C. Calhoun, who loved slavery, and we wanted to destroy healthcare reform and gun control and things like that. And Lou said, hey, it might hurt, but it's a badge of honor. I can just hear it in his voice. I'll tell you, that was probably one of the 3 coolest emails I've received in my life.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I guess that's a good summary of what I do.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. So what is your plan to bring back slavery?
We have a lot of listeners that are very anxious to hear this.
Chomping at the bit.
I mean, we're libertarians after all.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to decentralize, you don't like government power, you hate freedom, obviously, and you want to own other people. So, yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, generally, these types of folks, they attack you. They're all partisan hacks, first of all. So sure. I started my own political activism many years before I got into this kind of broader liberty movement in the mid-2000s. I would guess I would say I'm kind of a reformed Marxist of some sorts. I came from the far left. I spent a lot of time in the anti-war movement, marching with communists against the Iraq War, starting from day one in 2003. But I was doing some other activism before that. And I just learned over the years that every time government promises you something, they've either totally lied about what they're doing, or if they even can accomplish it, it costs like 1 million times more than what they said they were going to do. This is kind of the shift kind of came to me through Harry Brown. I read a lot of his books, listened to his radio show for many years. And so I recognize that no matter what government says they're going to do, they're full of garbage. And the best solution to that is to decentralize closer to the individual and all the way to the individual in every instance possible. And so when I started this 10th Amendment Center thing back in 2006, the initial goal was just to write a blog during the Bush years, that all their wars and their spying and their national ID cards was all nasty stuff, and it was crossing the line in the sand that was listed in the Constitution. We can get into that whole kind of documenty kind of discussion if you guys want to. But I just wanted to point it out, the hypocrisy of these people. And it's kind of caught on from there.
Yeah, so you mentioned the war state, and that's something that's big for Slappy and I. So how does nullification, how can that affect the war state?
Well, I did a few months ago an interview on Jesse Ventura's show on RT America. It was being guest hosted by a guy named Jimmy Dore. He's a very consistent progressive. You find people on the left or on the right, in the establishment, left and right, Republicans, Democrats, who are just partisan hacks, like the anti-war movement that I participated in when George Bush was in office, even though he dropped 70,000 bombs during his 2 terms, 70,000 in his 2 terms. He was terrible. I mean, most of us were right when we were thinking, man, this guy's like one of the worst, if not the worst in modern times. Well, when Obama came in office, over his 2 terms, he dropped 100,000 bombs. It was even worse. And there was war in even more countries. But where were the thousands of people in the streets? Here in Los Angeles, where I live, I was marching with tens of thousands of people down Hollywood Boulevard or in downtown Los Angeles. And the Sheens would come out. Charlie Sheen would come out and give a big speech and talk about all these different things about how they'd always have some celebrity on stage talking about how bad the warfare state was. But as soon as Obama gets in office, all of a sudden the peace president can bomb whoever the hell he wants, and it goes away. But this is kind of back and forth, no matter who is there. And, I'm rambling, and I totally forgot your question.
I mean, I liked your answer. No, it was what can we, how can we use nullification?
Warfare state. I'm on with Jimmy Dorn. Jimmy is he's a progressive. Probably kind of a Bernie type of guy, certainly an anti-Hillary kind of guy, like on the left, similar to what I would say Glenn Greenwald comes from. Opposed to the surveillance state, opposed to mass war, but big on national health care and a lot of economic stuff that I think we would all think is absurd. But at least they don't want to murder a bunch of people around the world with the U.S. military. So I can align with those people because they're honest and they're consistent. And they oppose the warfare state no matter who's in charge, whether it's an Obama or a Bush or a Trump. So what I told Jimmy Dore on this show was nullification opposes the empire because none of us can actually stop this thing. But my goal is to undermine it at every turn possible. The way it destroys the monetary system, the way it spies on us, the way it takes our money, everything that we can do to undermine its central authority, its central power, helps chip away at the warfare state, which extends its tentacles through the entire globe.
Yeah, right on. I love that. I mean,
we just have to, it's almost like this pillar of power that you have to chip away at. I would love to have just a switch that can say, okay, it's all done, but I don't really want a libertarian dictator either.
Right.
I want to undermine this thing so people can learn that you can live freely and safely at the same time without some overarching centralized power that's going to dictate things to you and probably to everyone on Earth.
Yeah, it's almost like the Uberization of the world. Is that you just undermine it with technology and not asking for permission.
Yeah, my good friend, his name's Robert Scott Bell. He's a homeopathic health practitioner, and he's really it's interesting when he does his daily radio show and we hang out and stuff, and he always kind of talks about health freedom, kind of an intersection between health and political freedom. He's, the health care or the health industrial complex in the U.S. is all about getting permission. And one of my favorite lines that he uses, he says, stop asking permission where none is required. So if you want to treat yourself, whether it's with cannabis or some other product, don't get permission from government to do it. Do your own research, learn what's best for you. And I think we can apply that same mentality to just about everything.
Yeah, it's a great attitude.
Yeah. So, I don't want to take this away from, because I like talking about the general nullification thing, but if we can touch on some jury nullification thing, because I think that's something that the average person can do, because like Slappy said, we all get called for jury duty, and you got to show up. So I guess I don't know if this is necessarily in your wheelhouse, because I
like stuff that's not in my wheelhouse.
Oh, then this is perfect. So, what are some strategies there? Because it's funny because my first when I became a libertarian, I was like, I don't want to be a slave to the state and make them serve me, be on a jury. And then I learned about nullification. I'm like, well, now I want to be on a jury.
Yeah, I ignored every single time that I had gotten a jury nullification. What is a summons, a request?
Yep.
I don't know what they call it. I always ignored this thing. These people are screwing me over. I don't work for them. Same mentality. I really should have gone. I probably would have been disqualified every single time. But we can go with the no victim, no crime. And if you're really smart about it and you really want to get on a jury, just respond, show up, play like you're a statist pig. Get on there and vote to acquit every time they've done no violent crime, no theft, no fraud, no violence, etc. But I do want to back it up one step. We talk about this is something that people can do. Well, I also like to look at cannabis. There are now 32 states that are defying Washington, D.C.'s prohibition on a plant in various levels. When I first started doing this, and I moved to California in 1995, they voted on Proposition 215 in 96. I moved from Wisconsin. I thought, oh man, this is crazy. 3 different presidents actually came to California to lobby against this, saying supremacy clause. You're going to waste your time. You're going to lose an expensive lawsuit. Well, the people did it anyways. But even before this whole vote, and even before 31 other state legislatures or ballot measures moved forward, the most recent was in Oklahoma, of all places, reddest of the red states. In June of this year, they passed the broadest medical marijuana law in U.S. history, of all places. But even before that happened, individuals were growing, producing, buying, selling, and consuming marijuana in defiance of state, federal, and probably local laws. And every single time one of those heroic pot smokers lit one up, they were, in essence, participating in a nullification of an unconstitutional, immoral, and unjust law.
Yeah. So I guess, and maybe this is kind of the historical thing that we can get into, but if they can't ever prosecute anyone,
sure,
then they're not going to pursue the laws anymore. Because, I mean, government always is kind of behind the times. They're going to, once the culture of the country or whatever changes, then they basically have to change, or else they're going to be absolutely useless up there. So could you talk, I guess, a little bit about the Fugitive Slave Act?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, when we talk about government being behind the times, I would often refer to government as a lagging indicator. I think that's a good phrase for it.
Absolutely.
You can look at child labor laws, for example, for those of you who know the history. I am no expert on it, but I've read a few books here and there. But also on marijuana is a good example. And I mentioned in a video that I recorded a couple of years ago, I think 2015, that there are so many states that were defying the federal prohibition that eventually the federal government would have to back off just to save face. And we see this on the verge of happening on a national level today. But going back to the Fugitive Slave Act, and we can also tie in jury nullification. So jury nullification is when you are judging not just the facts of a case, but also the law itself. So you could be sitting on a jury and they could say, oh, so-and-so did violate the law on this plant, but you vote to acquit because you think the law will give the person an unjust result. And in fact, this has been happening in Georgia just this summer. A lady named Catherine Bernard, an attorney. She also is the chapter coordinator for FIJA, the Fully Informed Jury Association at FIJA.org. I generally refer everyone asking about jury nullification to FIJA. They are the best activists. They are the experts on the history and the application of it. But what's been happening in Georgia is people are getting arrested, thrown in cages, maybe out on bail or something, for some type of nonviolent plant crime. They're admitting they were guilty, but they explain the situation. And then Catherine Bernard represents them in court and reads the Georgia state constitution, which tells the jurors that they have a right to judge not just the law, but the facts of the case. And she's gotten a couple of victories through jury nullification. This goes all the way. There's a long history of this type of thing happening. I'm glad to see its resurgence. It was most popular in American history, in my opinion. Now, someone else probably knows a little bit better than me, but during the fugitive slave days, in 1850, they had revamped an old law, I think from maybe the 1830s, called the Fugitive Slave Act. This basically required northern states to use personnel and resources, plus just any individual, to help be federal slave catchers. So if someone was black, made their way to the north, and some white dude came from the south and said, nah, black guy is my property, the black person would be taken to court, taken to prison, would go to court, and then wouldn't be able to challenge that. They would only go on the word of the white person. Then on top of it, the marshal, the commissioner, they weren't necessarily judges. The commissioner would get paid $10 if they sent the person back to slavery and $5 if they sent the person free. So it's this whole stacked, terrible, horrible situation. To me, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 is like the worst in history. So it was a monetary incentive, but what a lot of people were doing, and a lot of states, it was a combination of state level, what they called personal liberty laws, which required habeas corpus or taking testimony from the accused person. And then on top of it, they had like normal court cases. They would also, in Massachusetts, they would actually disbar anyone who actually became a commissioner. If someone was a state judge and then did this federal commissionership for these fugitive slave acts, they would actually lose their job in the state. And then on top of it, in places like Syracuse, they used jury nullification. There were a number of instances that was what they called the Grand Depot of the Underground Railroad. People would get to Syracuse, and then maybe a federal marshal might catch them, but you couldn't seat a jury that would convict. And one of the most famous ones was a man named Jerry who had escaped from Missouri. They broke him out of jail, caught him, and then they broke him out again. He escaped. They arrested 26 people. Daniel Webster, the monster that he was, threatened to prosecute everybody. They tried to, and I think 24 out of 26 people were set free through jury nullification. It's the last line of peaceful defense when someone is thrown in a cage, when nothing else is working. You can actually set someone free by just saying, no, I'm not going to vote this person as guilty. I guess it's the one place where I guess I would vote. I've never voted before.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, I wish I could say the same.
Yeah.
But did I hear you right that I didn't know this, that under the Fugitive Slave Act, it was just anyone could capture a black guy and
yeah. So basically, someone escaped, or actually, there are a lot of studies on how people were born free in the North and were mistakenly accused of being escaped slaves. I think 12 Years a Slave is a pretty realistic account. If you've never seen the film, it's a really powerful film. It's a very realistic account of how people got caught up in that system. And it was really just up to the so-called slave owner person. They took their word over everybody else's. And mind you, if you're talking about a double financial incentive, $10 to $5 seems small to us, but that was a huge deal back then. I can't put that in whatever modern dollars, but this is double. Yep. It was a financial incentive for the commissioner, for the judge to basically say, this person's a slave, send him away. So after all these personal liberty laws in the North, they were passed in almost every state. The last most famous person that was sent south was a guy named Anthony Burns in 1854, but it almost totally stopped it. The combination of the Underground Railroad from people like Harriet Tubman, the nullification acts by northern states in places like Vermont, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and elsewhere, Massachusetts, plus jury nullification, refusing to convict people in places like Ohio and Syracuse, New York. this combination really reduced the federal capability to actually capture and return slaves to ownership in the South. And in fact, the interesting part, as I've studied this, in South Carolina, you can read their declaration of causes that they issued with their ordinance for secession. And they go through this, they wax eloquent about the structure of the Union, and then they get into their list of complaints. And their first complaint, and they read through state after state, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Ohio, Wisconsin, on and on and on. Almost every state in the North have taken action to undermine the Federal Slavery Act or nullify, render useless to enforce it. So their first complaint was all these northern states were nullifying the slavery laws. So it is pretty absurd when the SPLC kind of lumps you in with a bunch of racists because they're just hoping that people don't know this history.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they have.
That's pretty juicy, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm trying to figure out the right words because you would think that they would maybe be more sympathetic.
On board? No, because I don't think the Southern Poverty Law Center is what they originally were founded to be. I think their goal is big central power, right. just like a Rick Santorum on the right. Their goal is never more individual liberty. It's only more individual liberty if it fits with their overall kind of messaging. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they're always for centralized power. That's what all these people love.
That's true. So now, go ahead, Slappy.
I was going to say those stories are great. And from the 1800s, though, do you think nullification was more popular then or more widely known? Did people back then kind of really care about the Constitution? Maybe. If I mention nullification to any of my friends, they look at me like I'm crazy. Until they
what if you mentioned weed?
That always works.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Even if you don't use the term, I don't care what anyone calls it. The fact of and I would say, and I'm friends with people at Normal and Marijuana Policy Project, Americans for Safe Access. No one calls it nullification in those realms. But it is what it is.
It is. Yeah.
I don't care what anybody calls it. What's happening is there's a law on the books in Washington, D.C., and individuals, businesses, and states are all defined it in huge numbers. I would say in larger numbers than at any time in history. There were sure, the country was smaller as far as number of states at the time, but to have 32 states flat out define the federal government just on that one issue. Plus, we have other issues where they're doing similar things. For example, the Right to Try Act. This was a bill that President Trump signed into law that basically took away some of the process of the FDA. People are dying, and the federal government was not allowing them to try experimental medications. I mean, think about that. Oh, you're going to die, but this is dangerous, so you should just die anyways. So over the last 3-4 years, over 30 states have started to allow people to do this without FDA approval. And of course, as a lagging indicator, the federal government finally says, yeah, okay, we'll start doing this. A guy down, Dr. Ibrahim Deplasand, an oncologist down in Texas, saved about 100 lives following the state of Texas Right to Try Act in defiance of the FDA, even after they sent him a letter telling him to stop treating his patients. So this type of thing is happening. It's happening on a larger and larger scale as time moves on, certainly more than it was 10, 15 years ago. And I think people are learning, whether it's from the left or the right, that if you want to get something done that you like, even if I don't agree with it, if you want to get something done that you like, it's not going to happen in Washington. More people are learning that. Not enough. In time, I hope that they will.
Yeah, so is the strategy kind of to get this stuff to trial, just so you can put it in front of bureaucrats and everything in front of,
or just keep ignoring so that there's nothing they can do?
Yeah, so for me, it really just depends on the situation. And if we want to go to the kind of founder's view of things, Thomas Jefferson, he's the guy that's basically credited with popularizing or putting words onto paper this principle of nullification, that when the federal government does something, it's up to the states to stop them. And the states, meaning the people of each state, can make a decision on how to deal with it. James Madison did the same thing. But after the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 were passed, this was authored by Jefferson as the vice president. He secretly authored this. Can you imagine someone like Dick Cheney or Joe Biden, or who's the guy now, Pence? Can you imagine one of them authoring something saying, let's undermine Washington, D.C. with nullification? But he did. And then right after they passed it in Kentucky, he sent the final passed version to his buddy, James Madison, with a letter that said, well, we should always hold true to our ultimate principle, but push as far as events will render prudent. So he's talking about strategy. So you always want to talk about your ultimate principle, but recognize that you're not going to always get there in one step. Take each step at a time, chip away, break it down. So whether it's getting it to a trial where you have someone like a Catherine Bernard who's going to recommend jury nullification to a jury, that is a very good strategy in that situation. In other places, it's a good strategy to simply ignore it because we recognize that the federal government on virtually everything does not have the manpower or the financial resources to enforce almost anything without help from state and local governments. And we could even talk some HOPA here if you guys want to.
Yeah.
You're into HOPA? Okay, cool.
Sure.
So HOPA back in 1997, he gave this amazing speech. I think it's a free download over at Mises Institute. I think it's called How to Stop the Modern State. What Must Be Done.
Oh, right.
And this was in Newport Beach, Southern California. Basically, what he said was, in the current situation, the status quo today, they don't have the resources to enforce all their laws. And the thing that you should do if you're going to do things is work locally to stop helping in the enforcement of each and every federal law. Hopa's words, not mine. He said, because without local enforcement by compliant local authorities, the will of the central government is not much more than hot air. This is the exact same message we got from Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. It's the same message that I put out. They may not have the same end goal, but they recognize the strategy. These are all very intelligent individuals. They all recognize the strategy of decentralizing, getting closer and closer to the individual. Some people will probably not go all the way there. Some people certainly will. But stop helping the central power violate your rights is the step to take right now.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good strategy because it's a lot easier to kind of empathize with your neighbors as opposed to empathize with someone that, we're Slappy and I are in the Philadelphia area, someone in California, just for example, just because it's on the other side of the country.
Freaks in California.
Yeah. Those weirdos.
California.
I love it, man. I get any type of food I want delivered 24 hours a day.
Well, there you go. Man.
I like my tyranny warm.
We got all 4 seasons of tyranny.
Yeah, right.
What was I going to say? Sorry, I'm blanking. Slappy.
No, I was going to say, I heard you tell a story before about, and I thought this was really cool and recent, relatively recent anyway. Maybe it was Colorado or something that the NSA was working and the local government cut off power to it.
Oh, yeah.
Does that sound right?
Well, you're on kind of the right
track.
So the NSA, this is basically, so when I'm on Tom Woods' show, he's always really excited to talk about this. I haven't been on for maybe a year, but he's always talks about our effort to nullify the NSA, as he just thinks it's the coolest thing on earth.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, after the Snowden leaks came out, a lot of people started asking me, like, hey, Boldin, what are you guys going to do about this? And my response was like, nothing. I mean, there's no way. So, but it was over the summer, which tends to be a little bit of a slower time for me. So I started kind of digging in and just Googling things. And there's an amazing amount of information on the Google. And I started finding all these like documents that were like, basically they're called MOUs or MOAs, Memorandum of Agreement or Memorandum of Understanding between the NSA and local governments to provide resources to expand into new facilities. The reason being, in 2006, maybe it was a little bit earlier, the NSA maxed out at headquarters the Baltimore area power grid. They were concerned about blowing the entire grid because they were running at capacity. So they were like, oh, man, we got to start expanding. So they started aggressively finding new locations. The most famous one is in Bluffdale, Utah, this huge NSA data center in Utah. Well, as I'm digging through doing some research there, I find that they are running, these supercomputers are run on a water cool system, and they need about 1 million gallons of water a day. This was the estimate to actually keep them cool and operational. It turns out that it's actually much less than that, but it's still a significant amount. And the interesting part is the water is provided by the city of Utah, which is a political subdivision of the state. And the state, under long-standing legal doctrine, does not have to provide resources or personnel to help implement any federal act or regulatory program. So the state of Utah could technically turn off the water and shut down the NSA data center. The same thing could happen in Texas at the massive San Antonio data center, or in Tennessee at the code-breaking facility in, I forget the town. There's also another facility in Washington State, in Georgia, in West Virginia, and elsewhere. So we crafted model legislation that would do just that. It has not been passed in any of those states. We have a first step that was passed in all places in California. A few years ago, it was carried by a guy in Congress now named Ted Lieu. And then just this summer, the state of Michigan banned the use of any state or local resources, personnel, money, anything to the NSA, because we know they're still trying to expand. So our goal is to try to basically box them in, create a scenario where they don't have access to the facilities they need in more and more states. And then we'll probably circle back and try to address them in Utah and Colorado and Texas and elsewhere. So the concept you've got right, but it actually hasn't been implemented fruition.
But there's a possibility.
Well, we're seeing it move forward in some states. The bill we went through about 2.5 years on this. And at first they just killed it. Then all of a sudden, over a period of time, it started getting a lot of attention. This is around 2015, I think. It had an off-season hearing with hundreds of people from the general public. Like, the word was getting out in the local newspaper. Wired magazine did a report on it. They were saying, wow, we think this thing is going to pass. What happens? A colonel from the National Guard stationed in Utah visits a lowly committee chair in Utah, tells him in his office, do not let this out of your committee. And the guy killed it. So he got threatened by the U.S. military, which is what the military does.
It's their job.
Yeah, it almost seems like it's this because the state's laws and everything and regulations is just a tangled web of just a complete mess.
Yes.
But that actually gives, libertarians who just really don't like the government an opportunity to spend a lot of time to comb through stuff and figure out creative ways. So
the law that we got passed here in California, it needs a mechanism to go into effect. It's just a technical thing. But basically, we stuck it through. It's so broad that technically, if we could get the next level going, which is going to be difficult, they would have to shut off electricity not only to the NSA center up in San Francisco, but to every DEA and FBI office in the state. So we probably overdid it. But it passed like 29-1 in the state Senate.
Great.
Jerry Brown signed it, probably because it wouldn't have an immediate effect.
Right.
But it's there on the books. Pretty juicy stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Sometimes you have to go over the top just to make a statement.
Oh yeah, well, because even if it doesn't exactly work because it's so over the top, if it gets something like that, I would have to imagine would get some sort of press to be like.
It didn't get much. We
really?
got covered in U.S. News, and as at the peak of us doing this when Obama was in office, I was on CBS This Morning, so we got some media coverage out of this. And we even partnered with Greenpeace and EFF to fly a blimp over the data center in Utah to bring more attention to it. So we're going to kind of ramp up on it again in the next year or so because of course, the Trump administration, who was supposed to be the good guys, they expanded surveillance powers even beyond what Obama and Bush had, made it even worse. So we are certainly pushing forward. It doesn't matter who's in office. They're all awful. So we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, but at least shows a chink in their armor.
There are a lot of chinks in their
yeah.
armor. In fact, in the so-called government shutdown, which of course is a joke, they don't ever shut down. But the so-called government shutdown of 2013, 2014, somewhere around there was everybody, all the government people are freaking out, right? I mean, we're thinking like, oh man, okay, this is it's a positive step forward. That's kind of cool. I'd like to see a real shutdown. But the National Governors Association issued a statement during that, and they were concerned about the so-called shutdown because, in their words, quote, states are partners with the federal government on most federal programs. Well, most federal programs don't work too well if half the team quits. So the states can actually stop helping enforce federal gun control from 1934, 1968, 86, 88. All the federal gun control laws are on the books. If the states don't help them do that, Judge Napolitano actually did a segment on this on Fox a couple of years ago. If a single state were to stop enforcing federal gun control in that state, it would make it, as he put it, nearly impossible to enforce. Now, that's not perfect, but I would take nearly impossible to enforce on gun control over what we have today. And whether it's surveillance, gun control, asset forfeiture, the drug war, or even on issues like sound money, you can undermine the central power that is Washington, D.C. and help create a little bit more freedom on a state or a local level.
Oh, absolutely. We don't want to dismiss that kind of thing just because it's not a perfect libertarian, society.
Is anything?
No. But I mean, maybe we'll get there. If people start accepting tractors as a proper means to every end, then we'll probably get there a lot quicker. So everyone should get to work on that.
What is encouraging is that not that long ago, like you mentioned earlier, there was no shot at weed being legal. I mean, at least in most people's minds. Now, I don't talk to anyone, and I don't care how old. I mean, even the boomers who are straight-laced conservatives think weed should be legal.
Yep.
I mean, I don't talk to anyone who is really strong on weed being illegal.
What's the message there then? If you lead by example on a smaller geographic level, then people learn that the world doesn't come to an end and terrorists aren't taking over the country because of some pot. Because that was the message that we heard off the bat. And when I started this organization in 2006, I often talked about weed in Oregon and California and elsewhere. And people on the left loved it. Bush was in office. He was horrible on this. Obama was actually worse, but that's another discussion probably. But the conservatives would always be like, we're with you on this whole 10th Amendment thing, but that weed thing, stop talking about it. And I said, no way. You should learn from this. I've actually ramped it up and I tell them to learn from the immigration sanctuary cities. But if you guys want to talk about that a little bit, that's a very interesting discussion as well. But basically, find what's working. This is clearly working. And now today you've got Oklahoma. Utah is going to be voting on a medical marijuana ballot measure in November. And one of the guys who's actually leading the effort there used to work with us at the 10th Amendment Center. And I would say 5 years ago, he said to me, he's like, no way, Boldin, there's no way we could. I mean, this isn't California, man. This is Utah. But today it might not pass, but it's got a very good chance of passing in Utah. Already passed in Oklahoma, which is really interesting. To me, it's very exciting. Most states, including California, they give you a list. They tell a doctor what certain things that they can recommend is the term, because they're getting around a federal restriction, what they can recommend cannabis for being used for, different issues, seizures, whatever it may be. In Oklahoma, they did not have any restrictions. They said it's totally up to the doctor-patient relationship. That's what makes it the broadest in modern times.
Nice.
And that happens in the reddest of the red states. It passed like 58 to 32 or 58 to 42. My math, I went to government school, so my math is terrible. But this type of thing, when you lead by example, and I gave a speech at PorcFest a few years ago, PorcFest 10. And basically the message was, look, we've all read a lot of great Rothbard, but we're not convincing the general public by handing them man, economy, and state. We need to show them by example that when you have more freedom, the world doesn't come to an end. Weed is a great example of that. The conservatives are now learning that this isn't funding terrorism. People can get rich out of it. People can get happy out of it. People can get healthy by using this product. And it's still illegal in Washington, D.C. So It's lead by example. Over time, I would like to see the same thing happen on guns and healthcare and just about everything else.
Yeah, could you spend a little bit of time talking about the immigration?
We'll watch the clock.
Yeah,
I know you got to go, but we like that topic
because whenever I hear about the sanctuary cities, it's always kind of the Fox News, like, it's just a crime. You know that. I'm sure you know the deal, but I never heard of it from sort of the nullification angle. So
it might be the most prominent example, maybe not the most loved, but most prominent example of nullification happening on a city by city level. Weed is obviously primarily state and individual. This is more on a local level, which is basically, I can make the Hoppian case for immigration sanctuary cities, which is kind of a fun one.
That's a good one. I like that.
Because Hoppe in this paper, he was basically saying, you're going to have way more liberty if you basically have 1,000 city-states around the United States of America. And he's saying, stop helping in the enforcement of each and every federal law. Well, there are approximately 300, give or take, immigration sanctuary cities in the U.S. today. And what are they doing? They're not sanctuary is technically a term of propaganda. They aren't providing sanctuary. It's not like people are running into a church and they're locking them in and they're protecting people from arrest or whatever it may be. Basically, what they're doing is they're just taking a hands-off approach. San Francisco, for example, the greatest so-called offender of federal immigration law is simply just not using resources to help the federal government enforce federal immigration law. And whatever anyone says about sanctuary cities, no one is saying this. Those sanctuary cities are terrible because I don't like what they're saying. They complain about them because they're having a big impact on federal immigration law enforcement. So why not take this plan of refusing to participate in some level of federal immigration law? Most cities, it's a very narrow area. And why not apply that to guns? Well, we see a number of counties up in Oregon, Eastern Oregon, that are working to get county level ballot measures to create gun rights sanctuary cities, or gun rights sanctuary counties, technically, where the county would not enforce either federal or even state gun control laws. So you can actually apply this. You can recognize that this is a very effective strategy because clearly it's working.
Yeah, they can't stop the sanctuary cities.
They absolutely can't. And I wrote an article for The Hill early last year. A lot of people think that Trump can come in and just defund them. He cannot. He's tried to. He's failed. They think he can just come in and force them to help enforce. Every time it gets to court, he fails. What it's called is the anti-commandeering doctrine. This has been reaffirmed from 1842 all the way till this year in 5 major Supreme Court cases. They're basically taking what James Madison advised in a paper called Federalist 46, where he said if you want to stop a federal program, he gave 4 steps. Not one of them was vote the bums out, but he did say specifically refuse to cooperate with officers of the union. His words, not mine.
I love that.
So the Supreme Court basically has upheld this by saying that states and their political subdivisions are not required to expend resources or personnel to help implement or effectuate federal acts or regulatory programs. That means the feds cannot tell the state to enforce a federal immigration law. It's up to the feds. But we know the feds only have about 5,300 ERO, enforcement and removal operations agents. They can't actually do it without help from the states. We know that the ATF has about 5,100 agents for the whole country, not even agents, 5,100 employees, with a third of them in administration. There is no way, if there were 11 million short-barreled shotguns in this country, unregistered, undocumented, in violation of the National Firearms Act of 1934, and if the states and local communities did not help the feds enforce, there would be nothing Washington, D.C. could do about it. So this is a very effective strategy. We see it working in front of our own eyes, and I regularly encourage people on the right, I know you're mad about the immigration sanctuary cities, but even if you want to stop them, why don't you pay close attention to what they're doing? Because they're winning, and use it for something that you like. And so that's my challenge to people on the right. Why not create gun rights sanctuaries?
Absolutely. And I can't wait to go into a conversation with them about immigration and say, well, I'm just doing the Hoppian thing and supporting sanctuary cities.
Dave Smith made this joke. He was out here in LA at an event earlier this year, and I gave that. This the first time I really made that case was at a Mises event last year, and then again on the Contra Cruise, which is, if no one's gone, this is the most amazing event ever. I did it on the Contra Cruise last fall. I talked about this, and Dave keeps making this joke. He's like, Boldin is the only guy that can make the Hoppian case for sanctuaries. But really, that's what it is. It's Hoppe's advice, but just applied to something that Hoppe probably doesn't necessarily agree with philosophically. But obviously, it shows that his advice, his strategy works.
Works, yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, and we're actually kind of talking about this on, well, we were talking about this on Twitter, I guess a couple weeks ago about, the disagreements and everything. And it's like, Hoppe's a great case where it's, I like Hoppe a lot.
Oh man, if you agreed with everybody,
it would be boring.
Lying.
Yeah.
Someone's lying. I don't even I don't agree with myself all the time. I say a bunch of garbage that's probably really stupid and really wrong all the time. But the key is to try to continue learning from our mistakes. And like for me, at least if we're talking, I think if we're talking Hoppe, there's a lot of infighting in libertarian circles. For me, I think what's lacking is a willingness to find common ground. Set aside differences where there's differences and work to find common ground until the state has so little power that we can start fighting about the other stuff. That's my view.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect way to let you go. And, really thank you for coming on. We appreciate it. Can you let people know where they can find you?
Well, that's a little creepy. Oh, my website.
Wow. We'll take your address, too, and your personal phone number. And
you can probably Google it.
Social security number.
There's no credit there. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com. I would add a /report if you want to learn more about what we do. It's a 70, 80 page kind of an annual white paper. We talk about these strategies, and then we also have a whole section in there on how they're being implemented today on issues like the right to keep and bear arms, privacy and surveillance, asset forfeiture, healthcare freedom, and on and on.
Awesome. Well, that'll be in the show notes page.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
You guys rule. I really appreciate you having me do this with you.
Yeah,
no problem.
All right, Rollo, so do you have a free market story for this week?
I do. So I was at the Eagles game this Sunday, and it was a miserable day out. It was raining all day. And I actually, in honor of Hoppe, I'll say that I did a lower time preference thing. And on the way to the game, I stopped at a drugstore and bought a poncho. I call that lower time preference mostly because we're just talking about Hoppe. But I guess it did it made my trip a little bit longer, so I had to delay the gratification of getting there, and for the sake of not being unnecessary, whatever. But as I was walking to the stadium, there were a bunch of guys out there who normally sell like pretzels and water and T-shirts and everything. But this time, since it was raining out, they were selling ponchos, and obvious demand with a miserable day out. Kind of don't want to be completely soaked sitting in a stadium for 3 or 4 hours. And what was interesting was when I was walking up, and I was kind of interested in how much it cost for a poncho, because you would think that in a situation like that, they kind of got you cornered.
Price gouging.
Yeah. But one of the guys announced what he was selling for. He said, $5. So I thought, well, that's actually pretty reasonable, because I remember they just had like the cheaper emergency poncho that they were selling. I think I saw they were like $3 or $4 in the store. So they weren't beating you over the head for them. And that's because there were a ton of guys out there. And I don't know if they, were all working for the same guy or were independent, but either way, they got to figure out what price is gonna clear their stock. And if they're trying to charge $20 for a poncho, but the guy 100 yards away is selling for $5, then it's probably not going to take too long for people to only buy from the guy who's selling for $5. So it makes everyone else lower their prices to be competitive. So it's a neat little neat little, free market thing going on there. And then the Eagles won, too, so that was nice.
That was a nice free market story.
Yes. So, show notes page, again, mcflugel.com/111. We'll have the stuff that Michael Boldin was talking about. We'll link to his Twitter, too, and his Facebook as well. And also to the 10th Amendment Center's Twitter. So, I guess we should talk about our Twitter and stuff. Check out the show notes page, too, to get the subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, all the good podcatchers, as well as YouTube. We're on Twitter, of course, so hit us up there and talk to us. And we've got a Facebook page and also libertymugs.com. And if you sign up to the mcflugel.com newsletter email list, you'll get a discount to go shopping at libertymugs.com. And our Friends podcast. We got Mance Raider with Free Man Beyond the Wall, Friends Against Government with Bert Arkus and Car Campit, the Dino Files, and then last but not least, Peaceful Treason podcast. Almost forgot. So, anything else, Slappy?
No, I think that covers it.
All right. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.